It is not often that we learn anything of substance at the GM meetings, but that changed yesterday as David Stearns seems to really like Carson Benge.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the number one daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find any of my written work, you do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right on, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. Well, the GM meetings is taking place this week in Las Vegas, and this is a time where GMs get in front of each other. They have some nice dinners, have a good time. They, start to set the stage for the offseason, but there's really never any tangible news that comes out of the GM meetings. David Stearns gave us some. Because David Stearns, who typically is very good at eloquently answering questions from the media without really saying anything or tipping his hand in any way, he gave Carson Benge a real pat on the back and put a little bit of pressure there and all but tabbed him as the Mets center fielder in 2026. And that is not something we typically see from David Stearns, or really any GM this time of year. So I want to go through some of the comments throughout the show today, but this is the one that we'll really have to focus on. When talking about young players, he said, we got some really good young players coming. We need to give young players a chance to play. When asked, who's your center fielder right now? He says, I think we have a couple options out there. Tyrone Taylor has proven he can play exceptionally well out there defensively. And then he says, Carson Benge is going to come to camp with a chance to make our team, and we will see where the offseason takes us beyond that. That's not a typical comment. And for more evidence of that, he talks about when you have young players at the upper levels in the minor leagues, you have to find space for them to play. He says there has to be room for our young players to get to the major leagues and to, when they deserve to get there, he says, and have an opportunity to really play once up. But then when asked about Jett Williams, would you put Jett in that same boat? He says, I think Jett in spring training, and he pauses and he hesitates. I wouldn't close the door on anything. We will see where the roster stands. I wouldn't close the door on anything right now. So there is a stark difference from I won't close the door to Carson Benge is going to come to camp with a chance to make our team. Doesn't sound like Jett Williams is going to get that same chance. Obviously, if Jett Williams shows up and blows coaches away and has a dynamite spring, and especially if Carson Benge does not, there's still a world where Jett Williams might get to assume that starting center fielder job if the Mets really do leave that door open for Carson Benge. But when the Mets are plotting their 2026 season and they're writing out the depth chart, kind of feels like Carson Benge is right there in that number one slot in center field with Tyrone Taylor as the fourth outfielder when you know that you have Brandon Nimmo locked in left and Juan Soto, of course, locked in right. This organization seems to be extraordinarily high on Carson Benge, which makes sense because all the scouts are as well. I've been saying it for months now. Carson Benge is going to enter the 2026 season as a top 20 prospect in baseball, no doubt. And I'm not going to be surprised at all if he finds himself in the top 10 of a lot of different prospect lists. And guys are making that jump to the big leagues more regularly at this stage in the game. We're seeing players jump right to the big leagues with minimal times in the minors. Carson Benge heading into his age 23 season. Jackson Merrill going into 2024 was entering his age 21 season. He was drafted out of high school instead of out of college. In 2023, he played 68 games in high A, 46 games in double A. He was on the opening day roster for the Padres. Julio Rodriguez, before he made his debut, played only 46 games in the upper levels in Double-A, never played a game in Triple-A. Corbin Carroll played 58 games in Double-A, 33 games in Triple-A. Now, all of those guys are stars, but there's every chance that Carson Benge is a star for the New York Mets. He played 60 games in High A, 32 games in Double-A, and then got 24 games played in Triple-A. And he absolutely dominated when he got to Double-A. That's supposed to be a tough transition. Carson Benge was like, thank you for getting me out of that ballpark off Coney Island where I can't hit a home run. Instead, I have to settle for all these triples. And he hits 8 home runs in 32 games, has a 978 OPS, and is so good that they promote him right up to AAA, where he was a phone call away from the big leagues, got hurt, got hit in the hand, and I think that really colored his experience in AAA. But the Mets are clearly going into this upcoming season expecting that he can make that jump. And it makes sense because he is such a high floor prospect. He does so many things well. You know, he's not going to strike out an egregious amount. He's going to put bat on ball. He's going to take his walks. He's going to play good defense in center field. Will he be an elite defender in center field? Will he be Pete Crow Armstrong out there? No. But also, nobody expected Jackson Merrill to be as good as he was in center field. You get Carson Benge, who has great instincts out there, has a really good arm. You put him in center field at the highest level with Juan Soto flanked to his left and see what the athlete does. He might be an above-average defensive center fielder in his first season, and if he does that, you already know his offensive upside does laps around what you might get from Tyrone Taylor. You also know, as we've talked about throughout this offseason, there's nothing on the market for the New York Mets in center field. Nothing. You can reunite with Harrison Bader, but it certainly feels like he'd much rather go back to the Phillies than the Mets. You can sign Trent Grisham, give up a qualifying offer, give up draft picks for a free agent that never should have gotten a qualifying offer. If you just look at what he did in his 4 years leading into free agency rather than just his platform year. You're going to go and try to bring back Cedric Mullins. And then you get to the trade market, which is where we get to the most polarizing player I think I've talked about this offseason, which is Luis Robert. And I want to get this out there because there might be a misconception, because I've talked about Luis Robert so much, that I am dead set on a Robert acquisition. That's not what I've been saying at all. Go back. I did a show how Carson Benge should be the Mets' answer in center field like 3 weeks ago. I think Carson Benge is the best option because acquiring Luis Robert when Chris Getz has this inflated value of what he thinks this guy's worth when he's making $20 million per season, it doesn't really make sense. He's the best of a lot of bad options. The best option, as David Stearns all but confirms, is rolling with Carson Benge. And the New York Mets are going to be making a full force effort at trying to win a draft pick by having the Rookie of the Year in 2026, because they might start on opening day Nolan McLean on the mound and Carson Benge in center field. Because another thing that David Stearns said is sometimes you need to develop your own ace. So I want to talk about that in the next segment. Also, a comment he made about Brett Baty. We're going to sort of go through where the Mets offseason needs may be based on what we could have gleaned from what David Stearns said today. So I'll get into all of that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. We got the NFL and the NBA seasons going on right now, and there is nothing better than being in a stadium or an arena surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets, it can be a hassle between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout. It can be really frustrating. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's fast, it's easy. It's backed by the Game Time guarantee, where you're always going to get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included. So the price you see is the price you pay, and the app made it super simple. I could even see my view from my seat before I bought, so know exactly what to expect when I arrived. Went to a Heat game over the weekend, had great tickets, and it was honestly the fastest, cheapest, and least stressful way I've ever gone about going to a game. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Now, a couple other things that David Stearns discussed that I thought was very interesting. When it came to third base, he all but gave the keys to Brett Baty. He says, I think Brett had a really good year, took some steps forward in his development. I think going into the offseason, he's someone we would pencil in for a significant third base time next year. When asked about Mark Vientos, he said Mark Vientos had a disappointing year last year, and Mark is motivated to proving he is closer to the player we saw in 2024. So the interesting thing is, this is almost similar to Benge and Jett, where David Stearns was not asked directly about Carson Benge. He was asked about center field, and he brought up Carson Benge. He was not asked directly about Brett Baty. He was asked about the third base position, and he said Brett Baty should be penciled in for a significant time at third base. Mark Vientos, he was asked about directly. Jett Williams, he was asked about directly, and you could tell the difference in a more tepid response. So I think if you look at how the Mets are viewing their club right now, the outfield, Nimmo, Benge, and Soto, that's their plan for the 2026 season. Is Carson Benge going to be ready on opening day or in the beginning of June? To be determined. But in the long run, what they're hoping to get to is that outfield. In the infield, Brett Baty and Francisco Lindor seem to be locked into that left side of the infield. Francisco Alvarez behind the dish. Luis Torrens, his backup. First base, second base, DH, all up for grabs. And I guess to an extent, center field is, but again, seems like they want to go Benge if they can. If he's able to show up to camp and earn that job, the Mets are going to leave the door wide open for him to grab. Now, filling second base, first base, DH, that could mean Pete Alonso, Mark Vientos, and Jeff McNeil. Could be. Could be Alonso as the DH and they bring in a first baseman, whether that's through free agency like a Ryan O'Hearn, or whether that's through trade like a Wilson Contreras or a Yandy Diaz. The second base situation is one that's really interesting to me because obviously, you're going to try to get the best two bats possible for first base and DH. And we'll talk more about Alonso in the next segment because there was, of course, questions there. So I'll go through what Stearns said, which wasn't too much, but I think there's a couple of interesting things that we can, pull from on that note. But second base is really curious to me because if Jett Williams is not expected to break camp, and it doesn't sound like he is, kind of feels like you're going to keep Jeff McNeil. Free agent market, you're looking at Gleyber Torres, got a qualifying offer. Jorge Polanco, old, not a good defender at second. I shouldn't say old when Jeff McNeil is the same age or a year older, but defensively, Jeff McNeil is a much better player than Polanco. Polanco, much better hitter, but I don't know if Polanco is going to be high on the Mets wish list. And then you have the guy I talked about on yesterday's show, Ketel Marte, who you'd have to swing a big trade for, but he would be obviously the best option. He's the best second baseman in baseball. So it's interesting to sort of see what the Mets are thinking. And we don't typically get such concrete responses. What he said about Baty and what he said about Benge, it really feels like those are two positions that the Mets are fairly confident in their internal options. And that allows us to focus more on second, first, and DH as the positions where the Mets may be looking to move some things around. When it comes to the pitching side of things, he didn't say anything clear-cut on Edwin Diaz, but he said the Mets will invest in their bullpen this offseason, that they have a clear need there, and they're going to address it. So there's not much more to be said about that. It could be Diaz as the closer. It could be they get 3 setup guys, and it's closer by committee. It just depends on how the offseason goes. When asked about getting an ace, what David Stearns said was pretty interesting. He said, I don't know how many true number 1 starters are out there right now. And he said, the way to ultimately have a true ace on your staff is to develop an ace on your staff. We are getting closer to doing that. The New York Mets might be comfortable with Nolan McLean being their ace in 2026. Now, he mentioned that if a frontline pitcher is available, they are going to be involved in those discussions. He said they have the depth and the quality of players in their farm system to either help the big league club or to make whatever trade they deem worthy of giving up some of that capital. To me, this eliminates some of the question marks, right? Are the Mets going to give up draft pick compensation to sign Zach Gallen as a frontline pitcher? I don't think so. Shota Imanaga, Brandon Woodruff, all these guys that got the qualifying offer, even Ranger Suarez. Are you going to invest in those guys and pay them like frontline arms if you don't think that they are frontline arms? I don't think so. So then the market narrows. Who are the aces, the true number one starters that are on the market? I don't know how many true number one starters are out there. Does he think Framber Valdez is a number one? Does he think Dylan Cease is a number one? If he doesn't, then is it just we're waiting around to see if the Tigers pick up the phone on Tarek Skubal? Because that's our guy. It seems like the Mets might be more motivated to go after the very top of the trade market or the free agent market if they're trying to invest in starting pitching. You mentioned the amount of options they have. They have a real, great number of starting pitchers when you factor in the guys that are coming up. He said not just the guys that we've seen, but even the wave behind them. The Mets are very confident in. You're talking about Jonathan Santucci and Jack Wenninger, two guys that made my top 10 prospect list that I broke down over the weekend. Guys that thrived in AA this past year. That means if you start in AAA in 2026, you're a phone call away. So I don't think it means the Mets are not going to get any starting pitching. I'm sure they're going to add somewhere. But I'm not entirely convinced, based on what he said, that they would look at Sandy Alcantara and say, we're going to pay what's necessary to trade for him and view him as a number one coming off a season where he certainly was not that. I don't know if they're going to say, hey, we're going to give Dylan Cease $200 million and we're going to forfeit draft capital because we think he's an ace. They might not view those guys as aces. And so they might not want to invest there. They might say, oh, Tarek Skubal's available. Let's go get him. We'll see. We'll see how the Mets approach it. They very well could go a completely different direction and say, you know what? Merrill Kelly doesn't have any qualifying offer attached. Very reliable pitcher that's going to eat up innings. Let's sign him to a 2-year deal and have him build out the middle of our rotation a little bit. It's interesting, but we'll just have to see how the market plays out. I don't feel like this is the market where you can clearly get that number one. Whereas next offseason, when Tarek Skubal's a free agent, that might be the time where the Mets are ready to invest. So again, maybe it's the trade route. Maybe it is being creative. Who knows what they try to do this offseason. I don't know if the Mets are going to spend in free agency for an ace. They might have to try to find that ace on the trade market. We'll see. Final segment, I want to talk about some other things that David Stearns said that caught my attention, particularly what he said about Edwin Diaz and Pete Alonso, and also the new coaching staff. So we'll get to all of that in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA season's here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and you're going to get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, you put down $5. If it hits, you're going to unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes watching football even more exciting. We got a little bit of something riding on the action, whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats. FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. It's quick, it's easy. It's the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays, as well as any day of the week when you got sports playing. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. We're exactly 100 away. Really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Now, the first thing that David Stearns was asked about was the coaching hires. And he talked about Jeff Albert, who he says is a natural fit for the Mets, coaching from within the organization. He worked to develop a lot of these hitters that really made big jumps in the minor leagues this past year. Talked about how he knows all those hitters very well, knows the big league hitters. So it really seems like the Mets have been thrilled with what they've gotten from Jeff Albert in his previous role of director of hitting for the minor leagues. Now he's the director of major league hitting. And obviously they value his knowledge of the biomechanics of swings and analytics and data, and he is going to bring that to the big league level. Also, he said that Albert was very familiar with Troy Snitker. These guys work together, so there should be a really good, melding of minds there. It was always a little bit awkward when you had Eric Chavez as the hitting coach in 2022, gets promoted to be the bench coach in 2023. It's a disaster. His assistant hitting coach, Jeremy Barnes, becomes the hitting coach in 2023. Then you can't demote Jeremy Barnes. So when you demote Eric Chavez from bench coach to hitting coach, they're just co-hitting coaches. And clearly there was a little bit of not quite a power struggle, but not that these guys were at each other each and every day. Eric Chavez said they had a good working relationship. Certainly doesn't seem like they're a buddy and friends. If Troy Snitker and Jeff Albert can work together well, and remember, Troy Snitker has had a co-hitting coach since he took the job with the Astros in 2019. So he's used to that structure. These two guys as co-hitting coaches, or of course, Jeff Albert having the better title, it seems, being the head of Major League Hitting, with Troy Snitker being the hitting coach, seems like they should work together very well. And Troy Snitker came very highly recommended. Then he talks about Kai Correa, the bench coach, and he said he's considered one of the best defensive coaching minds in the game, really innovative, can move teams and organizations forward on that side of the ball. Defense, once again, a buzz topic for Stearns. He didn't say run prevention a bunch of times like he did at the end of the season presser, but it was still something that was mentioned. He flatly said that they were brutal defensively, is basically what he said in the final 2 months. He said that through the first 4 months of the season, the Mets pitched well, played good enough defense. And then the brand of baseball, he said, we played over the final few months was unacceptable. So through their autopsy of what went wrong, they have pinpointed the defense in the final 2 months as a real contributing factor. Obviously, the pitching was bad too, but clearly what they saw when they were diving into the numbers deeper, they did not like. Whether that was Juan Soto out in right field, Pete Alonso at first base, Brendan Nimmo in left, whether it was, of course, the innings where Jeff McNeil was in center field, or even Cedric Mullins coming over and not playing the defense that they expected. It was bad. And so it's going to be a big part of what they're trying to do, but it doesn't mean wholesale changes. He said part of improving our defense is having some of the players who were with us playing better. He mentioned Juan Soto is eager to get better in the outfield and work on it this offseason. All but guaranteed is going to be in right field. He said Brandon Nimmo, they still feel is a very good defender, that his season was not as bad as maybe some would suggest, that there was still some plays that he probably could have and should have made, and that there's room for improvement there. Didn't directly mention Francisco Lindor, but it's clear that Lindor can do more defensively. It was a down year for him relative to the high bar he has set at shortstop. And so you can improve defensively by those guys all playing better. And even Pete Alonso, he said, he was asked flatly, I think it was Joel Sherman, kind of a harsh question towards Pete, but he was talking about how guys can improve internally. And Sherman, I believe it was, asked, he said, that include Pete Alonso? And David Stearns said, yes. And he goes, why? Like, why would you think he can improve? And Stearns' comment was, in the past, Pete Alonso has played a better first base, and they value his commitment and work ethic as a player to continue to get better on that side of the ball. So, yes, the Mets are going to try to be a better defensive team. Kai Correa was the first step to try to accomplish that, to have better coaching, to put your players in better situations. They're going to hope that they get more out of their corner outfield spots because Nimmo and Soto have a better year defensively. They're both a year older, but they still think that there is room for improvement there. I'm sure they think that Francisco Lindor is going to improve the defense because he's going to be even better at shortstop than he was this past year. I am positive that having Brett Baty playing more third base than Mark Vientos chipping in, that is going to help you improve your defense, as we talked about on a show. I guess that was, what was it, last week? Or maybe that was the show on Monday. It was Monday's show, actually. But regardless, that's another thing that's going to help the New York Mets. So I think obviously defense is a focus, but it doesn't mean getting 4 new players who are defensive minded It means internal improvements. It means hopefully Carson Benge being in center field can solidify that position with an all-around option. It means no longer playing Jeff McNeil in center field or Mark Vientos at third base. And all of these things can get you closer and closer to being the team that you want to be, that can have the run prevention required to be one of the better teams in baseball. When asked about Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz, he said, "We love Pete and Edwin. We would love to have both back." When mentioned, when talking about the timeline of things, he said, that a lot of times we're now seeing signings take place in January, February, and March. And so it does, behoove the Mets to be patient to see how these markets develop. He said, they're going to, base their pursuit of free agents based on how the market is responding in those segments. We do see that each year first basemen start to go and they all go. Last year it was, who was first? Was the Christian Walker domino the first one to fall? It might have been, or it was the Diamondbacks trading for Josh Naylor. Then it was Christian Walker signing with the Astros, and all of a sudden Carlos Santana got his deal where he went back to the Guardians, and then you had Goldschmidt with the, it all happened within a week, and then Pete Alonso was just standing there alone in the market with a lot of teams having filled their first base vacancy. So we'll see how the market develops. And I think the Mets feel pretty confident that they have a good relationship with these players and Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz, that these players want to be back. And that does give them a little bit of leverage in the sense that they can let their markets develop and react to them in a little bit in some ways. Now, if you do that to a point where these guys feel like you're not engaging with them, you do run the risk of alienating them and kind of pushing them out the door. I don't think that they're necessarily looking to move off of either player. I think they want to be cognizant of not locking themselves into a bad deal. And he was asked about being landlocked as a roster, having so many players on long-term deals that you don't have that maneuverability each offseason. And he did mention that there is a tipping point, but he doesn't feel like the Mets have reached that tipping point. And to me, the way he answered that question and talked about you have to be cognizant of it, you have to be thinking about it, you have to be looking at what you have for each year. But he also mentioned that to get good players that reach free agency and are in their 30s, you have to typically extend them past years where they aren't always going to be as effective. So I don't know if that necessarily means, we're not going to go beyond age 35 with Pete Alonso. It very well could mean, Pete Alonso is a bat that they can't afford to lose, that they decide to bring back. And, they still think that because they might view Juan Soto as having 5 more years left in the outfield, or Brandon Nimmo being fine in the outfield, whatever it is, that they have the ability to keep all these guys and still have that roster flexibility with positions like third base, second base, and center field a little more open than if Alonso signs and left field, right field, first base are all kind of locked in along with shortstop. And then it's just, how does the DH position get used? When do Alonso or Soto require a DH spot? But when asked about Pete Alonso and his defense in particular, and if that informs his value, he said all parts of the player's contribution inform how we view the player. He said for a position player, that is certainly going to include offense and what they do in the box, what they do defensively. But then he says it also includes what they do off the field, what they do in the clubhouse, and what they mean to the community. And when he added that to the answer about Pete Alonso, I don't think that David Stearns is tone deaf on what Pete Alonso means to the New York Mets. Andy Martino suggested as much in that report that I talked about in yesterday's show. I think the Mets understand what this player means to this franchise, and it's just a matter of the market. And if there's a team that says, screw it, we want Pete Alonso, we're giving him 7 years. If that happens, he's a goner. But if you just have the Boston Red Sox saying, we'd rather pay you instead of Alex Bregman, here's 5 for $150, the Mets might say, you know what, we'll match that 5 for $150. We just have to see how it all plays out. When asked about Kodai Senga, he said, we view Senga as part of our rotation. The talent is there, the desire is there. We're going to give him every opportunity to do that. That's if he's with the organization. Because the question was, do you see Senga in the bullpen? And that's just a silly question. I think Martino actually asked it. Kodai Senga can't pitch out of the bullpen. the guy is a sports car. He requires a lot of maintenance. Getting him on a reliever schedule where he can pitch at any time, just can't see it happening. If you want to bolster your bullpen with your rotation arms, to me, you're looking at the kids, right? You're looking at, is Brandon Sproat a multi-inning weapon that you can put in your bullpen next year because there's not enough spots in the rotation? Is the bullpen a way to ease Christian Scott in his first full season coming off Tommy John? Those are guys that could theoretically be put into the bullpen if there's not a spot in the rotation. Kodai Senga, I just don't see it. We'll see what happens there, though. Then when talked about payroll, he said we don't go into any offseason with any set payroll number. It must be nice to be the Mets president of baseball operations. And he said they're always open to pursuing players for lengthy contracts at high AAVs. They're going to continue to do that. It's just a matter of if the player's the right fit. Last thing. Got a question on Francisco Alvarez. He said Francisco Alvarez's hand is getting better. He's going to progress into a normal offseason routine once they get into December. And then it should be just a normal ramp-up process to get ready for spring training. So it does seem like Francisco Alvarez will be good to go for opening day, of course, barring any setback. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I said on yesterday's show, I was going to look at the Japanese market for international free agents today. Barring news, we got David Stearns presser with a lot of meaty topics to discuss. So the GM meetings, I think, might still be going on. What do we got? 10th to the 13th. So we'll see. If there's more stuff that comes out, obviously I'll address it, but I will give you by the end of this week, I promise, even if it ends up, the 13th would be Thursday. So yeah, even if it's Friday show bleeding into the weekend, I am going to cover the market for international free agents this week. And you will get a show with my prospects 11 through 20 on my top 20 in the Mets system. That will also come at some point this week. And then we're just going to react to news for the other shows for whatever does come up. Again, thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On the #1 podcast network. As always, if you want to be one of our Locked On Mets insiders, be part of our texting service, you can find a link in the episode description, or you can go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets.